The hardest part of funerals, Daniel realized, wasn't the crying. It was the strange pressure to perform grief correctly. People watched how long you stood by the casket, whether you spoke enough, whether you looked broken enough. By 11 that morning, Daniel had already done things nobody noticed. He'd picked up coffee for relatives who forgot breakfast, fixed an issue with the flower delivery, signed paperwork at the church office because his mother had started shaking halfway through filling out forms. No one thanked him. That was fine. He wasn't keeping score. At least that's what he told himself. His father, Richard Mercer, had died after a difficult year. Heart problems that turned into complications nobody wanted to discuss honestly until it was too late. Daniel had spent most weekends driving 40 minutes to appointments. His older brother Ethan visited when he could, which sounded better than the truth. Ethan arrived at the church 20 minutes late, wearing an expensive charcoal coat and the kind of confidence grief never seemed to touch. The room shifted around him. Relatives hugged him first. "Your father was so proud of you," Aunt Susan said, squeezing his arm. "You're the strong one now," another cousin added. Ethan nodded solemnly, accepting sympathy like it belonged to him naturally. Daniel stood 3 feet away holding extra funeral programs. Nobody noticed him. Agon. That wasn't new. Growing up, Ethan had always been the son people talked about, the successful one, the confident one, the loud one. Daniel was dependable in quieter ways. The son who answered late-night phone calls, the one who stayed after everyone left. Dependable didn't photograph well. The service passed in fragments. Old stories, forced smiles, people saying things like he's in a better place because silence made everyone uncomfortable. At the cemetery, Ethan gave a polished speech about family, about legacy, about how much their father valued strength. Daniel listened with his hands in his coat pockets. Half of what Ethan said sounded beautiful. The other half sounded borrowed. Afterward, the family gathered at a private restaurant room overlooking the river. The atmosphere felt emotionally confused. Some people were grieving. Others seemed relieved to be somewhere warm with food. Daniel sat near the end of the table beside his mother, quietly helping her when conversations became too overwhelming. Ethan sat near the center, naturally. Wine appeared. Stories started. Then came the subtle rewriting of history. "Dad always believed in hard work," Ethan said, swirling his drink. "I think he worried about certain people not really reaching their potential." A few uncomfortable smiles appeared around the table. Daniel looked down at his plate. He knew where this was going. He always knew. Ethan leaned back. He laughed softly, glancing around. "No offense, Danny, but Dad spent years stressing about you." The word Danny landed harder than intended, a childhood nickname used now like a reminder of status. Nobody interrupted. Daniel felt heat rise in his face. Not anger exactly, familiarity. "That's enough," their mother said quietly, but her voice carried no force. Ethan shrugged. "I'm serious. I love him, obviously." He gestured lazily toward Daniel. "But come on, family failure, right?" A nervous laugh escaped someone at the table. Then immediate regret, the kind that arrives too late. Daniel looked around. People avoided eye contact. Forks moved. Water glasses lifted silence. And somehow that silence hurt more than Ethan's words, because silence had followed him his entire life. The son who didn't complain became the son people forgot to defend. He almost stood up to leave. Instead, he stayed seated, tired, just tired. That was when the restaurant door opened. A woman in her 60s stepped inside carrying a leather folder. Professional posture, measured expression. No emotional performance. "Apologies," she said gently. Traffic was worse than expected. Ethan straightened. Margaret Collins. Their father's attorney. Daniel hadn't expected to see her. She nodded toward the family. "Richard specifically requested I meet everyone today." The room shifted. People sat straighter. Even grief paused when legal matters entered the room. Margaret placed her folder on the table. "There are practical matters," she said calmly. "But first, your father left instructions regarding a sealed letter." Ethan folded his hands. His entire demeanor changed, collected, responsible. Almost presidential. Daniel noticed it immediately, the version of Ethan that appeared when people were watching. Margaret opened the envelope carefully. "This is addressed to both sons." Her voice softened slightly as she read. "If you're hearing this, I probably waited too long to say certain things properly." The room quieted. Even Ethan stopped moving. "I know grief makes people remember differently, so I want facts to speak where emotion cannot." Daniel frowned slightly. That sounded exactly like his father. "Practical to the end," Margaret continued. "For the last 4 years, Daniel quietly handled responsibilities many of you never saw." A pause. The room shifted almost imperceptibly. Medical appointments, late bills, business debt negotiations, emergency decisions when I could no longer manage things myself. Ethan blinked. Daniel looked down. He suddenly hated where this attention was heading. He never asked for recognition. In fact, he repeatedly told me not to mention it. Margaret turned a page. Months ago, Richard had legally transferred controlling authority of the family's small logistics company to Daniel. Not equally, not temporarily. Fully, the restaurant became painfully still. Even silverware stopped moving, Margaret explained calmly. Daniel had already been acting as emergency co-signer for nearly 3 years. Business restructuring, debt prevention's key management. The company had survived largely because of decisions nobody else knew he was making. Ethan stared. You're joking. Margaret didn't react. No. But Dad would have told me. Her expression stayed professional. He believed involvement mattered more than assumptions. Nobody spoke. Not Aunt Susan, not the cousins, not the relatives who had spent all afternoon orbiting Ethan. Something uncomfortable settled over the room. Not embarrassment exactly. Correction, reality rearranging itself. Daniel felt strangely exposed, like someone had opened a private drawer he never intended others to see. Ethan's confidence didn't disappear dramatically. It simply loosened, quickly, like certainty leaving the body. You never said anything, he muttered finally. Daniel looked at him for the first time all evening. You never asked. No anger, no triumph, just honesty. The sentence landed harder than shouting ever could. Later that night, after everyone left, Daniel sat alone in his father's garage. The place still smelled faintly like sawdust and old motor oil. Margaret had handed him the letter privately before leaving. He unfolded it again. Most of it talked about responsibility, mistakes, regret, the burden of family. But one sentence stayed with him. One sentence he hadn't realized he needed. You spent years believing I didn't notice. I noticed. Daniel sat there for a long time, not victorious, not healed, just quieter somehow. Outside, the night moved forward without asking anyone if they were ready.